a 67-year-old waitress named Dorothy, a spoiled teenage boy named Brandon, and a table of bikers in the back corner who saw everything. Stay with me, because the way this ends is going to stay with you for a long time. Dorothy Miller had been on her feet for over 40 years. Not 40 years of sitting at a desk. Not 40 years of working from home in comfortable clothes. 40 years of walking on hard floors, carrying heavy plates, smiling at strangers, and going home with swollen ankles and tips that didn't always match the effort she put in. She started waitressing when she was 25. Back then it was just supposed to be temporary. She was going to save up some money, go back to school, figure something out. But life had other plans. Her husband got sick early in their marriage. Medical bills piled up. Then he passed. Then it was just Dorothy and her daughter Rachel. And the diner job that paid the bills wasn't temporary anymore. It was survival. She worked at a place called Patty's Diner in a small town in Tennessee. The kind of place with checkered floors, a pie display case by the front door, and coffee that had probably been brewing since 1987. Regulars came in every morning. Same seats, same orders, same small talk. Dorothy knew all of them by name. She knew what they took in their coffee, which ones were going through hard times, which ones needed an extra few minutes to talk before they went on with their day. She was the kind of woman who remembered your birthday, who slipped an extra biscuit on your plate when you looked tired, who called you honey and meant it. The regulars loved her. The staff loved her. The owner, a heavy-set man named Gary, always said Dorothy was the soul of the place. The food keeps people coming back, he'd say, but Dorothy keeps them coming back the second time. She was 67 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall. Gray hair she kept in a neat bun, glasses on a little chain around her neck. She moved a little slower than she used to. Her knees weren't what they were, but she showed up every single day, never complained, always smiled. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The breakfast rush came and went. Dorothy refilled coffees, took orders, carried plates, wiped down tables. Around 11 a.m., the diner got quieter. Just a few tables left, some older regulars finishing their meals. And in the back corner, a group of 6 bikers who had come in about 30 minutes earlier. They weren't what you'd call a soft-looking group. Big guys, leather vests, tattoos up their arms and necks, boots that looked like they'd walked across the entire country. They talked among themselves in low voices, ate their food, minded their own business. Dorothy had taken their order herself. They were polite, said please and thank you. One of them, a large man with a gray beard named Roy, told her the eggs were the best he'd had in months. She laughed and said she'd tell the cook. Just before noon, the front door of the diner opened. Brandon Calhoun walked in like he owned the place. He was 17 years old, the only son of one of the wealthiest families in that county. His father owned 3 car dealerships and a chunk of commercial property downtown. Brandon had grown up knowing that money meant he didn't have to wait for things, didn't have to be patient, didn't have to be kind, because there were always people around him whose job it was to absorb his bad behavior and keep smiling. He was the kind of kid who talked loudly in public so everyone could hear him, who filmed everything on his phone, who treated waiters and cashiers like they were furniture, things that existed to serve him, not people with their own lives and their own stories. He came in that day with 2 friends, both just like him, loud, bored, and looking for something to make themselves feel important. They sat down at a table near the middle of the diner. Dorothy walked over with menus. "Good morning," she said. "What can I get you boys to drink?" Brandon looked up at her with the kind of look that already had something mean behind it. He glanced at his friends, smirked. "Just water," he said. "And make it fast. We don't have all day." Dorothy nodded and went to get the waters. She came back with 3 glasses on a tray. As she leaned over to set the first glass down, Brandon moved his arm sharply, not an accident. Anyone watching could see that, and knocked the tray. Water spilled across the table, and some splashed on Dorothy's uniform. "Careful," he said, like it was her fault. "I'm sorry about that," Dorothy said quietly, pulling out her cloth to wipe the table. Brandon looked at his friends again, still smirking. Then he looked back at Dorothy. "You know, maybe if you weren't so old and slow, that wouldn't have happened." The diner got a little quieter. Dorothy kept wiping the table. She didn't say anything. "I'm just saying," Brandon continued. "Louder now. Maybe it's time to retire. You're like 100 years old. How are they even still letting you work here?" One of his friends laughed. Dorothy straightened up. Her face was calm. But if you looked closely, you could see it, the way her jaw tightened, the way she blinked a little too slowly, the way someone looks when they've heard things like this before and learned to carry it quietly because making a scene costs more than they can afford. She asked if they were ready to order. Brandon picked up the menu, looked at it for a second, then set it back down. He looked directly at Dorothy, and then, and he spit on the floor, right next to her shoe. The diner went completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where everyone stops moving. Dorothy stood very still. Her hands were at her sides. She looked down at the floor for a moment. Then she looked back up, and the expression on her face, it wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was something worse. It was a woman who had been worn down so many times that even this, she was trying to decide whether to just absorb and walk away from. That was the moment Roy put down his coffee cup. You could hear it, that small ceramic sound in the big silence of the room. He didn't slam it. He just set it down, slowly, deliberately, and then he pushed back his chair and stood up. Roy was 6'4", probably 250 pounds. The leather vest he wore had patches on it that meant things. Years on the road. A military service patch from 2 tours in Iraq. And in the center, in bold letters, the name of his motorcycle club. Behind him, one by one, the other 5 bikers stood up too. They walked over to Brandon's table. Brandon looked up. For the first time since he walked in, the smirk was gone. Roy pulled over a chair and sat down right across from him. Close. Eye to eye. His voice, when he spoke, was low and completely steady. You're going to look at her, Roy said. Right now? Look at her. Brandon didn't move. I said look at her. Brandon slowly turned his eyes to Dorothy, who was still standing there. That woman, Roy said, has probably been on her feet since before you woke up this morning. She's been carrying plates and smiling at strangers since before your daddy had his first dollar. And you just spit on the floor next to her feet like she's nothing. Roy leaned forward just slightly. She is not nothing. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He took out $200 in cash and set it flat on the table in front of Brandon. You're going to pick that up, he said. You're going to walk over to her. You're going to put it in her hand. And then you're going to look her in the eyes. Her eyes. Not the floor. And you're going to apologize. A real one. Not a sorry you got caught one. A real one. And then you and your friends are going to leave. Brandon's face had gone completely pale. And if you don't, Roy said, his voice not rising even a single note, we're going to sit back down and finish our breakfast. And then we're going to follow you outside and have a much longer conversation. He stood up, slid the chair back, and waited. The whole diner was watching. Brandon sat there for what felt like a long time. His 2 friends were not laughing anymore. They were looking at the table. Then, slowly, Brandon picked up the money. He stood up. He walked the few steps over to where Dorothy was standing. His hands were shaking slightly. He held the money out to her. She looked at it, then at him. I'm sorry, he said. His voice cracked on the word. I'm really sorry. What I did was wrong. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. This woman who had been carrying hard things for 40 years. This woman who had lost her husband young, raised her daughter alone, shown up every single day without applause or recognition. She looked at this boy who had been terrible to her, and her eyes went soft. She took the money. And then she did something nobody expected. She put her hand on his arm for just a second, like a mother would. And she said, I hope you remember this day. Not as a threat, as a prayer. Brandon and his friends left. The door closed behind them. For a second, nobody moved. Then Gary, the owner, started clapping from behind the counter. And then the whole diner joined in. The regulars, the other staff, everyone. Clapping for Dorothy. Clapping for Roy and his guys. Dorothy pressed her hand to her mouth and looked down. Her shoulders shook once. She wasn't the kind of woman who cried in public. But she came close that day. Roy and his crew sat back down, finished their breakfast, and left a tip that was bigger than their entire bill. On the paper napkin, Roy wrote 4 words in thick pen. You deserve this, Dorothy. She kept that napkin. Gary framed it and hung it on the wall near the register, right where Dorothy could see it every day she came into work. The story spread through the town fast. Someone who had been in the diner that morning posted about it online that night. By the next morning, it had thousands of shares. People were showing up at Patty's diner just to meet Dorothy, just to sit in her section, just to leave her a good tip and say thank you for still showing up every day. Roy and his crew came back 2 weeks later. They sat in Dorothy's section. They ordered the same thing. Roy got the eggs again. He told her again they were the best he'd had in months. She laughed and said she'd tell the cook. As for Brandon, his father heard what happened within hours. The story was everywhere. It said he made Brandon go back to that diner. In person, with a handwritten letter of apology. Whether that changed him or not, nobody can say for certain. But the people who saw his face in that diner that day, when Roy stood up, when Dorothy put her hand on his arm, when the whole room clapped, those people think maybe, just maybe, something got through. Because sometimes the lesson that shapes you is the one that humiliates you in front of everyone. And sometimes the person who teaches it to you isn't a teacher at all. Sometimes it's a 67-year-old woman in a diner uniform who responded to cruelty with quiet dignity, who took the money, who touched his arm, who said, "I hope you remember this day." She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't need to. She just stood there and was exactly who she always was. And that was enough. That will always be enough. There are people in this world who move quietly, who don't make noise, who just show up every day and do the work with love and zero recognition. They're in every diner, every hospital, every school, every home. They carry more than you know. They deserve more than they get. See them. Treat them like they matter. Because they do.